All right, sweet. Now we're live. Welcome everybody to the Python meetup. This month we have Nick Janetakis on a Flask extension that he wrote, which is really awesome. So I'm going to hand it over to him. Oh yeah, he's joining remotely, so definitely check out his stuff. Thanks. Go ahead, Nick.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Janetakis. I am a full-stack developer who enjoys working with Flask and Python. I do consulting work during the day and contribute to open source projects when I can. With that out of the way, let's get to the good stuff. This talk is going to be about how you can use Webpack, along with Flask-Webpack, to get a grip on managing your assets. But first, let's define what an asset is. It is a static file that generally doesn't get processed by your app server. The most popular file types are images, style sheets, and JavaScript. These files tend to be served directly by a content delivery network or perhaps locally through a web server such as Nginx. Now that we know what assets are, let's go over a few asset management steps. The following 6 steps are the most common things you can do with assets. We'll go over each step as this talk progresses, and I will explain how they will benefit either you as a developer or your website's visitors. After we go over the steps, we'll wrap it up and explain how Webpack and Flask-Webpack can step in and solve these problems for you in an automated way. So first up is minifying and concatenating files. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to write code that's readable and not have to worry about writing comments or separating your style sheets in JavaScript into dozens of files? If you do that, your file size is going to be very large. You will end up forcing your users to download dozens of files unless you concatenate them into a single file. The toy example shown here, the CSS code is taking up 151 bytes. But after we minify it, it's about 50% smaller. In a real application, you can expect to see 2 to 3 times reduction in size, and that doesn't even account for gzipping the files afterwards. After the files become concatenated, your web server only has to send 1 file over the wire. That's a huge win because your page will load faster for your users and you'll save money due to transferring less bytes on your server. The second step is pre-processing 1 or more files. Sometimes it's useful to write your content in Markdown and just have it compile into HTML almost instantly. I'm a big fan of using SAAS to write my CSS. In case you don't know what a CSS preprocessor is, it allows us in a way that has extra functionality such as variables and functions and more. There's a few different preprocessors and Webpack supports all the main contenders. In a similar fashion, you can do the same thing with JavaScript. ES6 is the next major version of JavaScript that's currently being evaluated to be in future browsers. The JavaScript committees who handle releases move slower than anything on Earth, but don't let that stop you from writing ES6 JavaScript today. With Webpack, you can write ES6 and it will produce a fully valid ES5 JavaScript that you can run in your browser, and it understands that today. Also, React is gaining ground in the JS community. It is an extremely interesting project and will likely end up being more than just a trend. Webpack support for React is outstanding. It allows you to compile JSX templates into JS with ease. Now, let's talk about attaching vendor prefixes to CSS. How many of you guys enjoy writing code that looks something on the left? I mean, you can barely read it there, it's so small. It's really hard to keep track of what properties you need to prefix. Having to write 9 lines of CSS just to set up a column-based layout is madness, in my opinion. Here's the same code example, but without the prefixes. Webpack has a neat plugin that handles vendoring prefixes for you. It gets its rules from the Can I Use website and is recommended by Google. I think Twitter even uses it too. It's a battle-hardened tool that can likely prefix CSS better than any human. You can see the benefits of this if you use plain old CSS, SAAS, or any other preprocessor. The beauty of Webpack is how it filters things in a chain. SAAS will become CSS. The auto prefixer works on CSS. The auto prefixer doesn't care if you wrote the CSS in SAAS or anything else. And don't worry, it doesn't do this on every single web request. It's only done once at build time. Wouldn't it be cool if you didn't have to worry about how bloated your images are too? Even expensive tools like Photoshop will create less than optimal file sizes, even with moderate compression settings. There are a number of compression plugins that you can play with. They produce extremely compressed images without losing any noticeable image quality. Your users benefit by quicker page loads, and you win because you save money on bandwidth. Now, let's deal with module dependencies. The code you're looking at might look alien to you, but it's just JavaScript. We're importing a React component and exporting our app, which is a subclass of that React component. This is the ES6 way of importing and exporting modules. It is a basic Hello World React app. React and ES6 are two separate things, but React tends to favor the ES6 style. Just about every piece of documentation on React will be with ES6. Next up is how to use imports. On the second line of code, you can see we're importing the app class from the app file that was in the previous slide. In a few years, this type of code will likely be standard JavaScript or very close to it. Luckily, we can use it today with no downsides through Webpack. Working with proper modules in JavaScript is finally possible. As Python developers, we're used to dealing with importing modules all day. I don't want to rewind and go back to 2005 where I was writing one massive JavaScript file or using some crappy tool that only knows how to concatenate them in order, but still expected you to wrap all your code in 50 DOM-ready events. Let's start developing for the future with Webpack. Soon we'll go over what Webpack is and how to use it with any web framework. Webpack is a front-end build tool and dependency resolver. It has no dependencies on Python, it's written in JavaScript, and it runs on Node.js. Webpack can take a bunch of modules that you've written and figure out all of the dependencies and output new files that browsers can understand in an efficient and intelligent way. We need a way to link the files it produces to our Flask app. To do that, I created a Webpack plugin which spits out a manifest.json file, and that file is generated by Webpack. Then a Flask extension called Flask-Webpack reads in that manifest file. It also sets up a few Jinja tags so you can use the assets in your templates without issues. Before we can get into Flask-Webpack, we need to take a peek at the manifest file. The gist of it is it acts as a lookup table for your assets. It is a file that is automatically generated, so don't worry, you never have to touch this directly. It has two main keys. The first one is a list of all your assets that belong to the project. And the second one stores where the assets are going to be served from in development mode using Webpack's dev server. Webpack has an excellent dev server. It's part of what allows us to get near instant compile times and feedback in development mode. Each asset has both a key and a value. The key is the relative path to the asset, and the value is the same thing except it has an MD5 hash attached to the file name. By tagging each of our assets with an MD5 hash, we can version them. The benefit to this is that you can have your web server cache the file forever. If the file changes, then the MD5 hash will change, so the cache will be invalidated. Basically, this means you will save a lot of bandwidth, your users are going to be happy, and everything's going to be good. Flask-Webpack introduces 3 new global Jinja tags, and we'll go over each of them. Asset URL4 lets you do a lookup on a relative path to an asset, in this case, a cat image. And once the template gets processed by Jinja, it's going to produce the HTML code at the bottom of the slide. Going back to the manifest.json file in our minds, remember the key is the relative file name, and the value is the same thing except with an MD5 hash. That's exactly what's happening here. We're doing a lookup by key, and it's producing the value. In addition to that, it is prepending the public path from that manifest file from before. This allows us to use an external asset server even in development mode. The other 2 tags are basically the same thing, but they're more convenient for use on style sheets in JavaScript. Supply just the tag and a list of file names, and it will produce the full HTML tag below. You can separate multiple file names with a comma. If you need more control over your link and script tag, that's fine. You can just fall back to using the URL4 tag and create your own links and script tags. Now, that handles getting it to work with Flask, but what if you're not using Flask? You might be using Bottle, Pyramid, or maybe Django. That's not a problem. You really only need to implement a tiny bit of code because the bulk of the work is being done by the manifest revision plugin that I wrote for Webpack. You would only need to write a few Jinja tags to do the lookup on the assets and also read in the manifest file. It's about 10 lines of code, and you can rip that straight out of the Flask-Webpack source code if you want. In fact, I encourage doing that. If you want to make an extension, I will gladly link it to the README file of that repo. Well, we just went through 30 slides, and statistically speaking, there's at least one person in the crowd who's about to go hog wild if he doesn't see a demo soon. Settle down, Johnny. We're almost there. You can download the demo code and the slides from the repo listed below. So at this point, we're going to check out the demo. All right. So here we just have basically a standard little site that some of it's being rendered with React, and all of the assets are being rendered through Webpack. And if we go to the app.js file here, we can see there's an h1 tag just rendered with React. What I want to do is add a couple exclamation points and save the file. If I go back to the browser, you see the exclamation points, but I never had to hit reload, and I don't have any funky extensions running. It just works. We'll go back to normal, save it, and we're back in business. So that's basically what Webpack and React can do for you for web development. So let's take a look how you can install it really quick. So you guys are Python developers, so I'm sure you know about pip. So here's a requirements file. There's the library. And here's a basic hello world app with Flask. And there's no difference here really, except that we have one configuration here, the Webpack manifest file. That's the manifest file that Webpack just spit out. We're reading it in here, the build folder, and there it is. Everything else is pretty normal Flask stuff. If you check out the Ginger template, there's the style sheet tag, there's the JavaScript tag, and there's the asset URL for. So it's very similar to how the slides shown it. This is basically Hello World React app, and we're using the import and export module system from ES6, and that's how we would import it. And basically, this gigantic config here is how everything is working on the Webpack end. Now, we're not going to go into this in detail, but things are commented out, and you can see everything on the repo. Going back to our slides, I'm releasing a Screencast tutorial series in the near future. It will cover building a large Flask application. We'll go over things such as handling recurring billing, streaming tweets over WebSockets, and deploying everything with Docker and much more. The Docker sections will be applicable to any framework, not just Flask. The project was funded successfully on Kickstarter not too long ago. If this sounds like something you're interested in, head over to the website linked in the slide and sign up to get notified when it's available. It would be my pleasure to give you guys a discount code for 20% off the screencasts. This would be an exclusive deal to anyone who attends this meetup group. Speak to Justin for the details on how to redeem them. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. You can do that through my site, or I can answer questions now. Well, that's all I have for today. Thanks for having me, and thanks for listening. And that wraps it up.
All right. Thanks, Nick. That was awesome.
Sure.
Anybody have any questions? No?
I don't think it was fast enough.
That was good. Awesome. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, no problem, guys.
Sweet. Thanks. I guess we're going to wrap it up here.
Okay.
All right.
Nick, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you later.
See ya.
Okay. Have a good night.